and welcome to Retvlog. This is just my weekly series where I touch base with the world of Retribution Paladins. I can be answering questions that people have been put there or just talk about whatever seems topical at the moment. Couple of things really. This might be a longer one today, so might be an ideal one for listening to while you do your world quests and stuff like that. The main topic is related to a thread that was on the US forums, of course, where else, with a community manager who plays Retribution Paladins, I'd say, responding to it. But a couple of things first of all. With this one, the aim is to sort of answer questions that people may ask. And so I looked at the last one. There wasn't really anything that people were asking on that one, other than a question I can't answer, which is about the class fantasy. If Blizzard was so keen on class fantasy this expansion, why have they taken away so many, you know, like iconic abilities from Rets? And I could talk about that, but I've already talked about that before Legion even came out. And again, I ultimately can't know the answer to that. But yeah, the other thing, I suppose, really quick, just this week, some people may have noticed the tier 21 stat changes. So they've reduced, they've just changed the stats on all of 6 pieces. This is tier 21. Remember, this is the stuff we get from Antaurus, coming out in about a month or so. They've reduced crit, haste, and versatility on these pieces and increased mastery to the point where, you know, the overall crit, haste, and versatility is less and mastery is more. Some people may be a little armed with that don't, because actually mastery is going to be looking quite good for us unless they make some changes to the set bonuses. One change they may make that they've changed in the last one, for example, is they may swap the 2 set and the 4 set around. But assuming they don't nerf them, then mastery is actually going to be looking quite good. So it's usual thing. You know, if you've got high item level pieces that you're not wearing at the moment because it's got mastery on them, keep on. I mean, mastery is not as bad for us as it used to be as well. It's not actually too bad now. But it's going to actively be good at some point. So maybe keep hold of them, unless, again, they make changes. So this topic, so yeah, it's US forums. So unfortunately, I can't post responses myself. Always really annoyed. I really hate that about Blizzard. Just combine them. There's no reason to suggest that the forums would explode if Europeans, and indeed anyone from an English-speaking player were to be able to respond on the North American forums. It would still be manageable. Other games manage it, and but yeah, but I can't respond. I'm not buying a North American account just to be able to post on the forum now and then. But so someone asked here, says Blizz, you're doing anything for Ret to bring our only DPS spec. I'm going to sort of analyse various bits of this as well. It says this is quite telling, and it's something that although I'm not saying it's the sort of thing I would have put on a forum myself, this thing does show some understanding here that it is our only DPS spec. That's always really crucial, because I was discussing something on the Ret Discord yesterday, actually, with a Ret player. Well, I say a Ret player, a good Ret player, but has played Rogue a little bit. But sort of trying to get across the point that, you know, one of our, in my views, main problems with Retribution and movement is it's not the fact that we don't have as good movement options as other classes. That's not the big thing for me. It's just the fact that where there's movement involved, you suffer, because, you know, when you have to move, you need to be pressing your buttons all the time. You get very little downtime as a Ret. And when you have to move out, whether it's to swap to another target or whether it's just to move out, as happens a lot on, say, Fallen Avatar, but can also happen on Mistress of Zine and other fights like that, then you're losing that downtime. You know, you've got abilities ready to use and you can't use them right now, and they're just going to waste. So you lose a lot of DPS. And this person was saying, well, Subtlety Rogue's in the same boat. You know, my argument there is, but, you know, Subtlety Rogue is not what you play. You play Rogue. So on a fight like Fallen Avatar, where you're going to be punished for constantly moving out of melee range, then you'd go Assassination, which is why Rogues go Assassination on Fallen Avatar and Subtlety on basically everything else. And you know, you've got that option. We don't have that option, so we've got one DPS spec. So that DPS spec has to allow us to do all types of content. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be awesome at everything, because this is where I think talents come into play. So, you know, the talent should allow you to deal with different situations, in my opinion. But anyway, that's an opinion. But anyway, so the comment garden, you can see it for yourself here. From the bottom to the mid pack, are there any issues being addressed PvP wise? I obviously can't comment PvP wise. I have no idea. The only PvP I do really on a regular basis when someone ganks me. Mostly when someone ganks me, they end up dead. But that, you know, that's not because that's not saying that Retribution Paladins are really great. That just means that someone's picking on me that really shouldn't be picking on me because they've obviously not got very good gear. Because that's the majority of the case. I can't remember ever being ganked by someone who easily beat me. And anyone who was a well-geared PvP player, I'm sure would easily beat me because I don't know what to do in PvP. And so I'm quite sure that whenever I do get mugged and beat them up, and I don't always, sometimes I get mugged by multiple people and even, you know, run out of luck. But, you know, when I do, like beat these people up, I'm quite sure it's just because their gear isn't very good. And I can kill them quite... Sometimes I can kill them in 2 shots. It's like, what are you playing at? Did you not look at my health at all? But I can't comment on PvP is what I'm basically saying. So it says, currently Rets and DKs, you definitely gave us the slow moving part. Again, that's not as big an issue for me, and we're not as bad off as DKs are. It says, now where's the powerful and why are Rets still a free honor kill again? Again, no, nothing about PvP. But what's of interest is some of the points. Now, first of all, there were several interesting things said, but I'm going to obviously focus on mostly the community manager's post. Remember, a community manager, these are the blue responses here, is just that. They're players like us. They're not developers, okay? So their opinions are no more or less valid than ours. Obviously, we understand that they're certainly not allowed to go free reign with their own opinions because they're community managers, they're PR guys. They've got to back up Blizzard's stance on this. That's not to say that what they're telling is wall-to-wall lies, but it will certainly be tempered by the fact that anything that they do have that is against development policy, they will not be allowed to say. But MVP, there's green ones, so we'll consider these worthy of note as well. So here we've got someone saying the biggest issue is tightly tuned encounters, which of course most people don't face. I mean, that's something important to remember. That's for the very top guilds. Most guilds don't really face in any serious way a DPS check. When you think you are, you're not really. If you can't make a DPS check for the vast majority of guilds, it's just because you're carrying a load of players who really shouldn't be in that raid, unfortunately. But we'll take the point anyway. So when bringing someone because they're only 5% better in performance matters. Certainly. Okay, so if you're going to be experiencing those low percentage wipes, then yeah. But again, how many people actually get those? In reality, it's like very rare rather than quite common. Now it says DPS checkpoints that are either, you know, do it or wipe, like Killjoy and Avatar, then even a class only a few % behind is perceived as no good. I think, though, when it comes to Avatar and Killjaden, people don't really say we're not taking that class because it doesn't do enough DPS. That's not really how it's not how it should be seen. It's really to do with what it brings. Now, on any fight, there will be mechanics, and those mechanics, and I mean the really serious mechanics that aren't just, you know, Goroth doesn't really have many of these. I mean, Goroth, your mechanics are if you get the thing around you, the circle around you, just go away from other people. If you get the star thing on you, the arrow on you, just go behind a pillar or two, knock them out. Go and insert Rain and Brimstone. All these sort of things are the sort of things anyone could do and should do. But there are some mechanics that some classes will deal with better than others. Such as, when it comes to Fallen Avatar, this is a wash with them, being able to solo soak Touch of Sargeras, for example. So that's an example of where you would bring players, you know, that can do that. Now, on a lot of fights, you'll have those mechanics where you want particular classes that can deal with it. So you put those in your roster. They've got the highest priority. But then there's always so many other places, like we've covered all the jobs that need doing. Maybe you've got a backup, but even a backup, you know, you probably shouldn't think about because you need people to live. You can't really say, well, let's take a backup in case they die. Don't die. If you're going to start dying, then we're going to struggle. But maybe if you've got the option, you take a backup as well, sure. And then you've got so many places left over for people who just don't bring anything, but they're just there for their DPS. And that's fine, you know, and that's absolutely fine. But with some fights, that number that's left over that you can sort of bring anyone is quite small. So Avatar, it's really small. particularly for melee, because ranged, they can always do the purple beam soaking. Now, I have done the purple beam soaking. When we killed Avatar this week, I was on purple beam duty. That's not a great thing for a melee to have to do. For a start, if you're in the purple beam and the maiden shield goes on, well, you can't do anything about it if you're in that beam. I mean, you try and move into the rotation such that it'll likely miss that. But nonetheless, that becomes an issue when you're having to do the Unbound Chaos. Now, normally what you can do in melee is if you're right up against the boss, when that comes in, you can just go back a couple of steps and then you can go to the side, as long as people have been sensible, to the side and in, and you never have to move out of melee range. When you're soaking the purple beam, you can't do that because you've got to stay in the purple beam. So you just have to move backwards. You are going to move out of melee range. That's all there is to it. If someone drops a purple puddle in your track, which they shouldn't, then sometimes you're in a situation where you can't even be in melee range because you can't just move to the side. You've got to be in the purple beam. So, you know, doing that job as melee is a nightmare, and you're going to you can potentially reduce damage on the boss. You can certainly reduce damage on the shield. So you ideally fill those up with ranged. So as a melee who doesn't really bring anything, there's like a couple of spaces. And that's where it becomes difficult. It's not that you can't take a ret on that fight. It's more that, and it's not the only spec that doesn't bring anything, by the way. It's more that you've only got a small number of places for those. So there's ultra competition within your raid roster for that last couple of places that basically anyone can take because you haven't got a special job to do. Now, there is first response from the blue, which I say is a community manager. So first of all, Retribution Paladins are nowhere near the bottom. Now, take that one first of all. Really? Okay, really? So what I've done is, first of all, going on logs. So what we can do is we can look at logs. So the first one is for Mythic 75th percentile. So we're not talking about the ones who are massively DPS whoring. 75th percentile. They are actually at the bottom, as we can quite clearly see here, based on actual performance. And what we're talking about here, remember, with these things, it's not all about, and I'm doing a separate video on this as well this weekend, it's not all about DPS, because sometimes you bring a useful thing and do a useful thing, and you know, so for example, full avatar this week, I was doing a useful thing. I actually still did much less damage than I should have done because I took the wrong talents. I didn't realise. But what's important is to note that even if you're talking about in terms of damage, there's three sources when you're looking at damage and comparing classes. There's three sort of sources that exist. The first one are logs. Now, those give you your actual, this is how much damage people are doing at a particular percentile compared to others. And you can do it for the whole raid, and you can do it boss by boss. Second is sims. But then you're sort of modelling a particular situation which is not necessarily realistic to the fights. Third is what Blizzard call their own internal data. But of course, we don't ever see that. They never share it with us. So that can't really enter into any debates, because how can it enter into... You can't... It's like going to court, isn't it, and trying to present a case. And it says like, you know, and I've got this piece of evidence that's going to absolutely prove my point of view. And the judge goes, oh, great, can we see it? No, but it exists. Doesn't really wash, does it? So we're going to look at logs and sims. And bear in mind, Ian Hazakostas recently said that they use both of those. They don't discount them. There are certain drawbacks, which I'm going to talk about in another video, but they don't discount them. So these are logs. These are actual logs. You could look at, you could say, well, that's the 75th percentile. Let's go down to the 40th percentile, move up a little bit, but it's still basically, I mean, remember, the position doesn't matter. If you're doing, if the bar is roughly the same length as a load of others, then you can look at it and go, well, you know, I mean, if they were all the same, if everyone was doing basically the same DPS within a percent, does the order really matter? No, it doesn't, because it comes back to the MVP person saying, you know, within 5%, that sort of thing. So if it's really close to another, so you could look at this one, and you could say, well, it's quite low down, but the ones immediately above it are virtually the same. So in that case, no, it doesn't really matter. But then again, we have to remember the potential for classes that have multiple DPS specs. So you don't look at the fact that there are some specs below or around about the same. If that class has access to a spec that's way above, then that class is way above. And that's all there is to it. So again, it still doesn't paint a pretty picture here. So then at this point, you think to yourself, okay, so what they're looking at. So you can look at heroic logs. Now, heroic logs, I think this this person, for example, is a heroic player. I don't know that for certain, but based on what they're saying here, because they can't say they're nowhere near the bottom if they're looking at heroic mythic logs, because that's demonstrably untrue. They can, even heroic, it's a little bit dicey, but then there's a comment they make later on, which I'll also tackle, which sort of suggests to me they're talking about heroic content. And of course, there'll be far more people play heroic content than mythic. But then it can also be argued that in heroic content, balance matters less. The further sort of down you go in terms of the old progress stakes, the more player skill and dedication counts compared to what your class is capable of. Whereas you're looking at the very top end, everyone is playing their class and spec so well, the only difference is what that class and spec brings. And it says, like others have pointed out, the data is misleading. Now, it's not misleading, assuming you remember a few things. What they're referring to here is an issue Blizzard had with logs, but it doesn't apply to Retribution Paladins. So what they said, and it's perfectly valid, this, let's say mages, for example, let's say you're comparing, say, Frost and Fire, which are both okay at the moment, but just for the sake of argument. So let's say Fire is a few % more DPS than Frost for most of the encounters. What happens is all your best and most dedicated players play Fire. So that then skews the result. It makes Frost look much worse because the Frost spec then, I'm not saying this is the case now, this is just hypothetical, is only being played by the players who are not as good, so they're not capable of playing Fire, or the ones who are not as dedicated, because bear in mind, the most serious, the best players are likely to be the ones who spend the most time practicing that class, and they're also, therefore, the most likely to be playing the game more, getting more AP, so that means their weapons have higher artifact levels, something that's not reflected in logs and things like that. You know, and all those sort of things, those factors play in. So when you're comparing specs within a class, then yes, you definitely get a situation where it can be misleading. But when you're comparing between classes, that's much less likely to be the case, because if you're a really good Paladin DPS player, you can only play Ret. That's all there is to it. The only way it could possibly be misleading in the same way is if you say that loads of people stop playing Retribution Paladin and play a different class entirely. But then you're, you know, it's a pretty major thing for a player to abandon their class to play another class. So if that were the case, then you'd be saying there's something very, very wrong with that one. So that particular one about the data being misleading does not apply when you're comparing classes' performance. It only applies when you're comparing spec within a class performance, as Blizzard said. So that's not something that's valid here. And it says, currently I still see that if I have more than one target, I know Divine Storm overpowers Templar's Verdict, and I'm free to cleave like a madman. So this is the point where I'm also thinking, yeah, this is for heroic. Because if they were doing Mythic, they would never say this. There are fights in Tomb of Sargeras where there is the option for cleave, and Divine Storm is useful on as few as 2 targets. In fact, it could be argued 2 targets is ideal, because our judgment will jump to the other one as well, so we get maximum benefit from that. But yeah, Divine Storm, just, you know, the more stuff we've got, the more damage we can do, because it just straight out does its damage to all the things in range. The fact that it goes 20 yards forwards as well helps us. If things aren't clumped up well, but in a line, we can sort of get through that as well. But on Mythic, although those same ads are there on Mythic, you can't touch them. You don't touch them. I mean, the very start of, you know, Demonic Inquisition, yeah, you can still cleave, but then they have to be separated out. But, you know, if, for example, there's extra ads even on Mythic, but if you start AoEing those ads on Mythic as a Retribution Paladin, you're not really doing what you're supposed to be doing, because other people will handle those. You're supposed to be DPSing the boss. So actually, you're reducing the chance of your raid killing the boss if you cleave on Demonic Inquisition, apart from the very start of the fight. Harjatan, again, there's sometimes when you want to use Divine Storm, and there's sometimes when you must not, when you actually need to like burst that egg down, for example. Mistress Azine, you don't want to kill the Abyss Stalkers too early, otherwise then you've got no puddles to deal with the tornadoes. Remember, the tornadoes don't even disappear with these things, they just move a bit, so you have to make sure you get those puddles in the right place and at the right time, and they don't last as long on Heroic. So although some guilds do go cleave mad now, that's mostly because they've got so much DPS that they can take care of the next lot of Abyss Stalkers that are nearer the Tornadoes. But even then, there'll be some management of them needed at certain phases, like the third phase. So you have to basically be single targeting even when there's adds all around you on Mistress of Zine on Mythic. Okay, the same may apply on Desolate Host. You don't want to be killing, for example, in the Spirit Realm, the Soul Priestesses. You need at least one alive to be able to do the Shattering Screams for the adds on the other side. You know, there's all these fights where there may well be adds that on Heroic you just go, yay, cleave. On Mythic you've got to be a bit more careful and just focus on that single target. The cleaving is for guilds that are doing it so well and have got so much gear that they can afford to do that, and to hell with it. They can basically use Heroic tactics and just do that to pad, to rank. But in terms of playing it properly, Divine Storm is not used anywhere near as much as it would be on Heroic. So it becomes much less of an argument here. And then it says, of course, I wouldn't object to bus. Blah, 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 blah. It says, this could change with our 21 set bonuses, consider we'll be losing the tier 24 set that interacts so well with our talents in Crusade. So tier 24 set means that our Blade of Justice generates 3 holy power. I don't know what they're talking about with interacting so well with talents. I mean, obviously, the more holy power we generate, the more spenders we can use during Crusade, so you can sort of give that lead in. But of course, bear in mind that Crusade was nerfed along with the tier 20 stuff as well. So I'm not quite sure what they mean about that, but they didn't explain it, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. It says, however, in the current state, I think Ret Paladins are quite fine and pretty formidable among melee. Then how come they're not performing as well? And how come a load of famous Rets, and very high playing Rets, have gone rogue this expansion? We all know the reason, because in particular for Fallen Avatar, they're much better. So again, you know, you need something to back that up with. Now, next little comment. Someone said, I can't say I agree with you here. Movement is quite, again, they're focusing on the movement thing. For me, again, the problem with the movement is not the fact that we don't have loads of charges and speedy boosts and stuff like that. It's the fact that we lose so much when we have to move. But anyway, people focus on this movement thing. It says, movement is quite punishing for outside of Steed. Divine Steed off global cooldown would be amazing right now. Now, I absolutely agree with this. And more than just Divine Steed. I think that all utility abilities should be off the global cooldown. Global cooldown makes sense for damage abilities and you know, spells in general that do output. You know, healing would apply equally. But utility, ones that exist purely for utility. Some of them are off the global cooldown. For example, Crusade, Avenging Wrath, they're off the global cooldown. But generally speaking, these things are not like interrupts tend to be off the global cooldown as well, which is fairly important. But a lot of things are not. And in fact, I remember when interrupts were not off the global cooldown, that could be quite a panic. When you were waiting for your cast, you're doing your DPS, then your cast came in, and you're just having to spam that button, wait for the global cooldown to finish, and hope you, if it was a quick cast, hope you got the interrupt off in time. But that is at least off now. But I think all utility ones should be off. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute when they talk about Blessing of Freedom. So it says here, true, Divine Steed coming off global cooldown would be a nice change. However, having the option to switch to Cavalier, I feel, fills that need for me when I want the additional mobility. It can, but you have to be quite sure that it's not always ideal on progress on most fights, because what often helps is having Divine Intervention. Because remember, we don't get a lot of damage reductions, right? We get eye for an eye for physical stuff, which is useful on Hydra Shot, Mistress of Zine, and not useful anywhere else. You can have a situation, Tomb of Sargeras, particularly Mythic, where someone else can kill you, remember. We're not talking about your own stupidity. Someone else can kill you. And for that, it's quite nice to have the Divine Intervention. Now, you'd have to be quite sure you're not going to need that, because Cavalier is not going to move you any quicker when you're dead. It doesn't work when you're a corpse. But yes, sure. I mean, things like Maiden, for example, where Divine Intervention is actually a pain in the ass. You know, I do take Cavalier. Cavalier is also going to be something at some point I'm going to take on Kill Jade and Mythic, where we've progressed to the point where I don't feel the need for Divine Intervention. But at the moment, it is sort of saving me when I don't quite get the healing I want when I'm dealing with a particular mechanic in phase 1. But at some point, that's going to get on. We're going to be fine with that, and then I will switch to Cavalier. But here's a weird thing. It says, Cavalier plus our blessings fill any need of mobility I've encountered this tier. Now, I'm going to come to what they add to that, because this is baffling to say the least. But someone says here, with the tier 24 piece going away, some busts would be nice. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's tuning that we need. In actual fact, I'm going to say this right here and now. Obviously, the Antorus they've been testing the bosses in Antorus, and the Retribution Paladins that have been doing the playtesting are saying that it's really, really nice for Retribution Paladins. So, and I'm going to say this as well at this point, like, Legion as a whole has actually been pretty good for Retribution Paladins. We had no issues in Emerald Nightmare. We had no problems with Trials of Valor. We were pretty good at lots of times in Nighthold. Tomb of Sargeras, not so much. On the crucial fights, remember, it's not that we've been bad across the tier. There's one fight we've been really bad, and that is Fallen Avatar. And when I say really bad, I just mean don't bring anything on a fight where you really ideally want people to bring something. And, you know, but the rest of the fights is sort of okay. But Antorus is looking really good. So Legion as a whole, actually, we're in a pretty good place. It's just this, but we are talking about Tomb of Sargeras here. That is the focus of this. So it says the 4-piece even feels like it's made to be baseline, since it makes the spec feels much more fluid. I think that's wishful thinking. Spending that one extra GCD is annoying when you need AoE. But I mean, the thing is, I will say at this point, just to provide balance and counter arguments, with AoE, with a raid, you want to be able to predict the need for the AoE. So you make sure you build up your holy power and then be ready to unleash your AoE in that burst window when you need it. That is part of the skill of raiding, that you anticipate. So when you get all these people who go, oh, I don't play with boss mods, I don't play with add-ons, that's for crutch for people. These players will never complete anything at any decent level in raiding, unless they're reliant upon raid leaders chirping out instructions. You know how sometimes raid leaders have to call out, you know, in a few seconds this is going to happen, in a few seconds this is going to happen. And I'm often thinking to myself, why are they doing this? It's just unnecessary babble, because I can see it myself. I can see it using the same add-on that they can see, and they're calling it out. But the reason is that you get several players who either don't have those add-ons, or if they have them, they don't use them, so they're not paying attention. So they're the players who actually have the crutch. They have the crutch of the raid leader telling them in a few seconds this is happening. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is, in a raid, you know when these things are going to happen. You plan for them. So I'm not going to agree that we need it for the AoE, because that's reactive. You're talking about reactive play here. You want to be proactive with raiding. It says, I would like to see tier 21 change, though. I don't think we will. And also you have to remember, although I'm not happy about the tier 21 set bonuses, the reason I'm not happy is just because they're just a bit dull, but they are very powerful. You know, in terms of numbers, in terms of making us strong, they're powerful. Let's make no mistake about that. You want tier 21, and you want it quickly. So the next one, it says, I agree here as well. I've become very used to the tier 24 piece. Well, you know, I have as well. I much prefer it just from a philosophical point of view. And it feels very baseline to me at this point. But again, that is the point. Blizzard have said this as well. We've known this for a long time. They deliberately make tier sets to change our gameplay. So we get used to a particular gameplay in one tier. Then the next tier comes along. Oh dear. And we go over to the next one. And our gameplay changes again. And we have to adapt. That's the nature of it. Where it often is the most jarring is when you then, because what often happens when you switch in tiers is, obviously you're going into the new tier, but then maybe you're still doing some raids, or some of the raid bosses at least in the previous tier. That's the benefit of being able to skip across to the last couple of bosses that we get if you've done the quest. And so sometimes you're used to one particular set bonus for like I was used to tier 19 set bonuses for doing Gul'dan, and now I'm used to using tier 20, and that was quite jarring to begin with. The same thing will apply here. I'm used to doing Kill Jaden and like I mean, we can skip across to like Maiden, Kill Avatar, Kill Jaden. Those are the three we'd have to do if we wanted to get to the last boss, aren't they, with the quest. So it's the last three bosses we'd have to do. So I'm used to the old tier 20 set bonus there. Well, when we get into Antorus and I get those set bonuses, and we go back to do those last three, I'm going to have to get used to a different way of playing those bosses. So that can be quite jarring. But Blizzard like that. They like to freshen it up in that way. Since it's going to take some getting used to. Yes, it is. It's going to take getting used to, and we're all going to have to get used to that. Then someone said, so people generally see mobility as a primarily gap closing. I think that is true, and I think that's what's led to a lot of these statements. I don't. I see it as dealing with mechanics. So it's not always moving from one target to another. In fact, it rarely is in raids. You go through the raids, how often do we need a movement speed to gap close? Not very often. Mostly we just need it to get out of something. And the gap closer part maybe is coming back, but what do you use? Do you use the movement speed to get out at the last second? Or do you get out in plenty of time and use the movement speed to get back in as quickly as possible? Each of them, you don't save any more time doing one than the other. So take Gordon Bennett, I can't remember the name of it. But the ability on Fallen Avatar where everything goes green, you need to move. The further away you can move from the boss, the less damage you take from this ability. And you've got two choices there. Either you can just wait there till last second, then sprint out and then get back leisurely. Or you can get back out in plenty of time and use your movement speed to get in quickly. Except neither of those in that particular fight is always ideal, because then you haven't got your movement speed to deal with a very bad like dagger, shadow dagger thingy, if you need to shift yourself across the other side of the room. But, in theory, that's the idea. So for me, it's not about gap closing, but I do accept that for a lot of people it is. That's what they think about. Possibly because a lot of people really are thinking about PvP, which I can't comment on. So what the blue response is, this is generally what I'm talking about. Mobility and movement are not just gap closing. It's the ability to get in, get out and ignore. Because if you can stand in ability and not need to move through whatever means of negating it, then you're essentially eliminating the need to move at all. It says, really, that quote came out of me not wording it correctly, so that's my blah, blah, blah. What I should have said was, Retribution Paladins have great mobility utility options for movement. Again, we don't. We have okay mobility insofar as getting us to where we need to get and get back. It's okay. No more than that. But we still lose the damage doing it more than many other classes. I'm not saying all, but more than many others. So then someone's just a general statement, but let's go through here. Now, here's where I'm really going to take issue with this. There have been lots of encounters over the years that have mechanics that you can ignore due to Blessing of Freedom and Blessing of Protection. I would immediately ask at this point, name them. Because you can generally think of one or two in expansion. That's not lots. That is not lots. Blessing of Protection in this tier has actually had more use than it can, because there is use for Blessing of Protection on Mistress Asine, and there is use of Blessing of Protection, particularly on Mythic, on Kill Jaden. Because Blessing of Protection allows you to put it on someone who could not normally soak a large Armageddon on Kill Jaden, because that's pure physical damage. So you can use that on someone who could not normally soak it. And on Mistress Asine, you can bop someone to get rid of the Murloc in your face, if it's in like phase 3 and you can't get rid of it with Thundering Shock, because that doesn't exist there. So there's those aspects to it as well. Or you could put it on someone, I suppose, to help them out with a Hydra Shot potentially. But that shouldn't really be the case. You've got other ways of dealing with that. Now, here's an interesting one. It says, I can't tell you how many times Freedom has saved me or a raid member during Mistress Asine. What? So let's think about it this way. What is Blessing of Freedom useful for? It's useful for something that either roots you or slows you. If it roots you, then it is undeniably useful. So we're thinking back to Cenarius now in Emerald Nightmare. So you could use Blessing of Freedom on someone and they could go around clearing the roots. That was great because that rooted you. That's why they were called roots. So if someone's rooted and Blessing of Freedom will remove it, which it mostly will, then it is useful because you can imagine the situation. Someone's stuck in these roots. I need to get out because otherwise I'm going to die in a few seconds. You put Blessing of Freedom on them. Away you go. Mistress Asine doesn't have a roots mechanic. It has a slow mechanic in the puddles that are left behind by the Abyss Stalkers when they die. But how on earth does Blessing of Freedom help you with those? Because you're slowed, right? What's the big deal? If you're stuck in one of those things, by the way, incidentally, being stuck in one of those things is retarded unless someone drops it under you, because you're not actually doing any damage. You need to move out of it quickly as possible anyway. So why do you need to move out of it? Well, the tornadoes are heading that way. and the tornadoes will potentially kill you if they run over you. So it's like, okay, are you describing a situation where you're in this green stuff and the tornado may hit you? The tornadoes come right the way across the room. You drop the green puddles in the middle of the room. You've got a long time. You could move out of there within a couple of seconds. No puddle is big enough for you to need more than a couple of seconds to get out of it, even slowed. So the scenario I am imagining is the tornadoes must literally be upon you. How does that save someone else? By the time they've called out for it, it's hit them. Because apart from anything else, there's a delay in the voice comms as well. But there's just the usual delay, and they think to themselves, oh, I'm screwed, because they didn't see the tornado slowly coming at them from the other side of the room when people were calling out, oh, tornadoes are coming in. You know, so they've only just got enough time to say that. Then you've got to think, oh, who's saying that? Work out where they are in the raid frames and put it on them. No, I don't buy that. I say Blessing of Freedom has saved 0 people ever in Mistress Azine. People that are retarded enough to still be in the green stuff, which, remember, stops you doing damage. So it's not like there's ever a situation where you can even be in this stuff DPSing the boss and you've just forgotten about the tornadoes, because that's the sort of thing that could happen in theory. But you can't do any damage in the green stuff. As soon as green stuff appears underneath you, you are moving out immediately because you're not doing any damage. So that's a nonsense. You know, anything else they've said is an opinion thing. That is an absolute nonsense. Where Blessing of Freedom has its use in Tomb of Sargeras, potentially, is on Fallen Avatar. If someone, for example, knows, especially if they're soaking the purple beam on Mythic, and they know, for example, that there's a purple patch behind them, they're going to need to move with Unbound Chaos. They know they're going to get slowed in this thing, and they're a bit worried. I mean, even then, to be honest with you, you will still outrun the Unbound Chaos. But of course, you know, you've already got reduced healing being done to you because of the debuff. It would be nice if you could move through the purple patch quicker. So you could say to the Paladin, can you put Blessing of Freedom on me? Sure, I'll put Blessing of Freedom on you. In that situation, you can argue Blessing of Freedom has some use. If I thought really hard, maybe I'll think of another time when it's been useful in Tomb of Sargeras. But at the moment, I'm not thinking of it. But Mistress Azine, no. It says, Freedom and Blessing, both are great utility options Retribution can bring if they're needed, especially if they have great reaction and raid awareness. Like, again, you know this is immediately nonsense because, not trying to be rude, because people don't, like, you know, when guilds as a whole, like, I'm trying to recruit rogues at the moment. Like, we want multiple rogues. Why do we want rogues? Because their utility allows them to completely ignore mechanics. Sometimes you'll want a couple of warriors. We have a couple of warriors. We'd ideally like a couple of warriors. They have stuff that is useful. You know, they've got a raid-wide defensive buff for a start, which is fantastic. And also great execute class. Fantastic for when you have those fights for which the final phase, the execute phase, is the mad dash to get the boss killed. As a lot of tough bosses are. So, yeah, they're ideal for that. And they also have great movement as well. But that's neither here nor there. You don't get them for their movement. So some classes just have really good utility. And for that reason, you will definitely want them in your roster. No one ever says, right, we need to get a Retribution Paladin because, you know, they've got these things that we really want for this fight. When people actively seek Retribution Paladins, it's because they're at that time, and it's been happening in the case several times in Legion, the damage is actually pretty good. You know, so the same thing with Antorus. At other times, it's like, well, if we find a good one, we'll have one, and if we don't, we can do without them. Even though one healer might be slightly disappointed because they won't be getting their Blessing of Wisdom. So it says here, the last little bit they said, and it said also, but yeah, there have been mechanics that you can actually eliminate by casting Blessing of Protection on someone. The fraction of a second they're targeted because it's applied if you're fast enough. No. Blessing of Protection is useful on people that are going to take physical damage. Forget about anything else. Or for removing a source of physical damage, like the Murlocs, as I say, on Mistress Azine. And even then, you only do it on Mythic because... So I go back to the Heroic Mythic thing. You know, they wouldn't talk about Divine Storm being really great if they were raiding the Mythic Tomb of Sargeras. Just like you wouldn't say Blessing and Protection was fantastic for Heroic, because the Murlocs eating your face is not an issue on Heroic. It's an issue on Mythic, because if someone's got a Murloc on them and they're due to take the fish, which is a Mythic-only mechanic where you get a buff, they would lose that buff immediately, because you lose the buff if you take any damage. Murloc eating your face does you damage. So we use it for those people. But they do add at the end of it, it says also, so that everyone is still aware, I'm a community manager and it's just my opinion on the state of Retribution. You can totally disagree with my assessment and that's fine. Retribution is fun to me. It's fun to me as well. It has to bear in mind. I mean, I'm bound to get some comments on this as well, because sometimes you'll get comments going, whenever you do a video that's ever, even slightly critical of anything Blizzard are doing, it's always, oh, you're just a troll. I had someone say recently, oh, you're taking it from Az here. And you think to yourself, well, I Mythic raid in World of Warcraft. So straight away, I play the game quite a lot. It's my main hobby. Second of all, I do a World of Warcraft channel on YouTube. That adds an awful lot of extra time to it. Third of all, I'm an officer in my guild, so I spend extra time on the game through those activities as well. So make no mistake, I spend as much time on World of Warcraft across those different activities as I do doing my main job, which pays my bills. To suggest that I dislike World of Warcraft would be madness. Why would I do this? Am I a masochist? No. I love the game. It's a fantastic game. I love playing Retribution Paladin because it's fantastic in many, many ways. Doesn't mean to say that I'm not allowed to criticise where I feel criticism is necessary. And anyone who's watched my channel for any number of time will know that the vast majority of my videos are actually quite positive about the content. But anyway, there we are. As I say, I haven't even looked at the time to see how long I've made this one, but a slightly longer one than normal. Remember, if you want me to tackle a particular question, then just ask those below. If it's the sort of thing I feel I can do like a vodcast on, then I'll do those each week. I'll sort of look back at the comments from the previous one and see if there's a question. If not, I'll just pick what I think is topical at the time. And then every now and then I do the live Retribution Q&As, but I tend to do those like once a patch or something like that. So I would probably aim to do one of those maybe just before Antorus comes out, because that would be between BlizzCon and Antorus, and there'll probably be things to talk about from both fronts. And then I'll probably do another one a few weeks later after Antorus has been out for a few weeks. It might have to be a few weeks as well, because I've just found out I'm likely to be working on the first week, in the evenings that is, when Antorus comes out, depending on exactly when it comes out. So that might screw me there. But thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. Check out my playlist. You might see there's Retribution Paladin, there's guides and vlogs and other stuff like that in various playlists. Check those out as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.